بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Now in this week's lesson, in our final lesson regarding bathing and shrouding the deceased, the final topic which we are going to look at is regarding the actual burial itself. And under this particular section we'll be looking at visiting the graveyards, qabristan, and what adabs and what etiquettes which we need to adhere to when we are visiting the graveyards. So alhamdulillah, as I was saying, that this is the final topic. We've looked at sakaratul maut, we've also looked at bathing the deceased, we looked at shrouding the deceased. In last week's lesson we were looking at the janazah salah. So in this week's lesson we'll be looking at more regarding the burial. Now it's mentioned that the first ruling, what is the hukum, what is the ruling of burying the deceased? So it's mentioned there that it is farz kifaya to bury the deceased, a communal obligation. So you can see there's a kind of a trend there. We mentioned that bathing the deceased, that's also farz kifaya. Shrouding the deceased, that's also farz kifaya. Similarly, we mentioned before, like praying janazah salah in last week's lesson, that's also farz kifaya. So similarly, burying the deceased, that's also farz kifaya as well. Okay, you can't, burn the deceased to ashes. You can't, like, what's that thing called, Snow White, have the deceased in a glass kind of coffin and on the earth or something like that, not burying it. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a farz kifaya, it's communal obligation to bury the deceased. The next subtopic which we are going to look at is regarding the graves. Okay. Now there are two types of grave which a person can dig when it comes to burying the deceased. Now the first one is called lahad. Okay, so lahad. And what is a lahad? Lahad is basically that grave where you then dig a separate compartment inside the grave. Okay, so just say for example, just say for example, just imagine this, like this particular room is like, say, the inside of a grave. So what happens is that you dig from just imagine the roof here, or the ceiling here, sorry, just imagine that's like the ground, the earth. So somebody digs on the earth, and then on the side of the earth, on the compartment, you then dig another kind of chamber or another kind of hole. And then what happens is that you then place the deceased inside that compartment. You then conceal that, you then conceal the hole, and then afterwards you then put the remaining earth and soil on the other part of the hole. That makes sense? So that's what lahad is. We'll just read. It says that it is a grave in which at the bottom of the grave on the qibla side. Yeah, that's another point. Qibla side, yeah. Qibla side meaning like whichever direction the qibla is. So just imagine if we were to dig it here. So qibla is that direction. So on that side we will dig a compartment wherein the deceased is placed, and thereafterward the compartment is sealed and the rest of the grave is filled with soil. Okay, so that is called lahad. And anybody who witnessed, say, a burial in Bangladesh and all these places, they tend to do that. That's what they normally tend to do in Bangladesh, lahad. They do a compartment, that kind of compartment, they do that in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, these places, yeah. Now the second type of grave, which is obviously normally done in the UK, is a shaq. Okay, shaq, yeah. So you could also pronounce it shiq as well. So shaq or shiq. Okay, so that's the second name of a grave, yeah. Shaq or a shiq. And basically that is what we call like a normal regular grave. You know what they dig normally in the UK? So just basically a trench, and they just bury the deceased there and then cover the deceased with the soil and the mud. Okay, so that is called a shiq. Just quick. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's the second type, which is called a shiq. Yeah. And thereafterwards, the deceased is covered and the grave is filled with soil. Now, this obviously then takes us on to the next question here, is that obviously which is the most preferred one, which one is more better to do. So in the Hanafi fiqh, or according to the hadith, to do the lahad, that is more preferred. So this first one here, having that compartment, digging a compartment on the side and then sealing that is more better, because it's mentioned in the following books of hadith: Sunan Abu Dawud, Musnad Ahmad, Sunan Tirmidhi, and so on. However, it goes on to say shiq is also permissible. However, where the ground is soft and there is fear of the grave caving in by forming a lahad, a shiq will be dug. Does that make sense? Basically, do you know this? The first one, lahad, you can only do that in, say, hot countries, like as I was saying, in the Middle East or in the Indian subcontinent countries. Why? Because of the heat. The ground is always firm and hard. So when you dig it, you can then dig another compartment on the side and you could then place the deceased there. But like in England, the problem is that the ground is always like rainy, it's always kind of soft here. So if you were to dig a lahad in England, just for example, you dig it and then you try to do another compartment, what's going to happen is that, the earth on that side, it will kind of cave in. Does that make sense? Yeah, the grave will cave in, because when you dig like a hole right in the middle, then what's going to happen is that the area on top will just kind of cave in. So therefore, in the UK, it's more better to do lahad. That's what I said. Like predominantly, they do lahad in the UK, but obviously, if you are looking at which one's more better and more virtuous, then as I was mentioning, the lahad is more better than shiq. But in the UK, because of lahad, you can't really do that, because the grave will cave in. So we just do a shiq, which is like basically a trench in the middle. Any questions regarding these 2 points before we go on to the next one?
Does it have to be like certain depth?
Yeah, it's coming up later.
Is all the material that's used in the lahad, what is just done so?
Yeah, obviously you conceal it afterwards. You conceal it with like planks of woods and so on.
Oh, okay.
We'll look at it later, inshallah. Okay, the next subtopic. Will the deceased be placed in a coffin? So when we bury the deceased or the mayyit, so do we place it in a coffin or not? Yep. Now it's written there that where there is a legal requirement, okay, so basically those places where you have to do it by law, those councils, those boroughs where you have to, place the deceased in a coffin and then burying him, like in Birmingham, like in London and so on, other probably places in the UK, then in that situation, obviously you got no, you can't complain about it. Basically, you have to then place the deceased in the coffin and then bury him. However, where there is not a legal requirement to bury the deceased in a coffin, like in the northwest, like in Preston, Blackburn and these places, then in that situation, it is more better to bury the deceased not in a coffin. Okay, just to like basically place the deceased there and then the soil and the mud on top of him. To bury him in the coffin, then that would be considered makruh and disliked. Okay, and it's also mentioned there as well that, however, where the soil is moist and there is fear of water reaching the body, in which case placing the deceased in a coffin will be permissible, and both lahad and shiq graves can be formed. Okay, so what I mean by that is, just say for example, in a situation where, like say for example today, it's like very, very wet. So just say if somebody passed away today and you were burying him today. So now, even though there's no legal requirement to bury the deceased in a coffin, but if we were to just put his body there, and then there's a danger that what could happen is that, after you then put the soil and mud on top, there's a danger that the earth on top may collapse onto his body. Okay, because we're going to look at later, it should be like at least, the depth of the grave should be preferably it should be according to one's height. So it's like 6 foot down. So what could happen is that if you got the deceased, the mayyit, right at the bottom, and then you've got the soil and the mud on top. So when it's like a danger of the earth collapsing, and also there's a danger that, because obviously when it's wet, the moist and the water will then seep through onto the deceased, then in that situation it will be better to then place the deceased in a coffin and then burying him in that way rather than just leave his body like that. Okay, so that's what this particular last ruling is telling us, is that where the soil is moist and there is fear of water reaching the body, in which case placing the deceased in a coffin will be permissible, and in that situation doing the lahad grave, as we looked at before, the compartment one, or even doing the ship grave, that would also be allowed as well. Any question regarding that point? Or
This is very differently in foreign countries. In this country, I think the grave is filled with.
yeah,
Are you referring to the countries where they just put something on top of the grave and then put soil?
what do you mean they put something on top of the grave?
They usually don't fill the grave, they put, I don't know, like planks of wood.
Bamboo.
Yeah, at the bottom they put bamboo and planks of wood. Yeah.
It's almost to the top. I've actually seen a burial.
Okay.
Where they put the deceased in the grave, and then on the top end of the grave, they put bamboo. And soil.
Okay, what I've seen was that it wasn't like more top. I'll say it's more like, say, halfway down, or but a bit more near to the bottom of the grave, where they'll have the planks of wood, or as the brother mentioned, bamboo, and they place the deceased on top of that.
On top of the grave.
On top of the, yeah. So obviously, this is a situation when there's no coffin. So they place it on top of the bamboo, and then they start pouring the soil and the mud over it.
On top of the deceased.
Yeah, on top of the deceased. What was the question? What did you see? Or
No, it's okay, because you're saying that if there's a fear of like soil or water dripping into the grave or something,
Yeah.
you would place the deceased in a coffin.
coffin, yeah.
But obviously, if they're already in the grave and then don't have a coffin over the soil and it's going to get to the deceased anyway.
Yes, yeah. I think here it's talking more about like the moist or the wetness. So if there's danger, like what could happen is that if it's really wet, so what could happen? It could like probably spoil, especially right at the beginning, when, remember, it's still kind of like still got the flesh there. And I mentioned before as well that when the deceased, when the mayyit passes away, he still kind of feels things. So I think it's in that situation probably be more better to like put the mayyit in the coffin rather than just leaving it for nature. Yeah. Well, obviously regarding the soil and the mud, it will obviously eventually go down. Okay. Okay. We'll just move forward. Size of the grave. Okay. Now, what's the minimum depth of the grave, and also what is the preferred limit of the grave? So it's mentioned that the minimum, so we're talking about minimum here, is half of the deceased size. Okay, so, or deceased length, shall I say. So for example, if the deceased is around 6 foot tall, then to have it, say, 3 foot down, that is the minimum. And the preferred depth is to have it full height of the deceased. Okay, which is just say 6 foot. So to then dig 6 foot down, then that is considered to be preferred. However, obviously, say you should not exceed this. The width should be half the height as well. So we look at the width of the grave, so it should be like half of that. So to say, what normally people do is just tends to be 6 foot down and then 3 foot width. Okay, so that's like general, because generally speaking, a person tends to be around 6 foot tall, and so on. So or just thereabouts. So 6 foot down in terms of the depth, and obviously 3 foot wide. Okay, so that is like the size of the grave. Okay, the next topic here is the sunnah method of burying the deceased. Now it's mentioned that it is sunnah to lower the deceased into the grave from the Qibla side. Okay, so whichever direction the Qibla is sunnah, obviously if it's not that staunchly followed, there's nothing wrong with it. but it is preferable that you bury the deceased from the, or sorry, you lower the mayyit or the coffin or the deceased from the Qibla side. So just say for example, if we were burying someone here, then obviously Qibla is that side. So therefore what you will do is that, the body will be lowered from this angle. Okay, so you lower it from this angle into the grave. Okay, and the reason why is obviously when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was buried, then it's mentioned that this is how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was lowered to his grave. He was lowered from the Qibla side. Okay.
Is it head first or feet first?
Head should be first. Head.
If it's from the Qibla side, doesn't that mean that the feet will point towards the Qibla?
Okay. Yes. So sorry. Yeah. It'll then be the
Feet.
yeah. It'll then be the feet. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Then you'll have to put in the feet. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So how about if the grave is like this and Qibla is on this direction? So
Okay. No, when it comes to lowering the body, you should just do it from. Like, it says, we're going to look at it here, that you should try to. The main thing is that the mayyit, the deceased, his face should be facing towards the Qibla. So that's the main thing.
Okay.
His face and his body as well. So when it comes, so as you were saying, if the grave is this side,
yeah.
then what you will do is that, and the Qibla's on this side. So you will just like from that direction,
Bring the body
yeah,
down.
you bring the body down.
Okay.
But the main thing is to have his face and his body just slightly tilted, very good, yeah, to the Qibla side. That's the main thing. Yeah. So irrespective whichever direction the actual grave is. Okay. The second ruling is that it is a sunnah for a number of people to enter the grave, regardless of whether they are even in number or odd. Okay. So it's actually considered to be sunnah. Obviously, not possible in this day and age, but it's actually considered to be sunnah that when you are lowering the body into the grave, obviously nowadays they use those machines and they use the belts to actually lower the coffin in the grave, but obviously we're talking about the sunnah way. The sunnah way is that, because obviously if you're going to lower it like that, there has to be someone there in the grave to actually receive the body and then place it, because if you're just going to go like that, the mayyit's going to hurt itself when you are lowering it. So obviously to avoid any pain on the mayyit, on the deceased, so there should be someone, few people inside the grave, obviously receiving the mayyit and the deceased and then gently lowering it into the grave. Okay, and as I said, that's the sunnah. Even when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was buried, it's mentioned that Hazrat Ali radhiyallahu anhu and also Fadl bin Abbas, who was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's cousin brother, they were inside the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they took the body of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they then gently lowered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his final resting spot in this mortal world. Okay, the third ruling goes on to say that those lowering the body into the grave should recite the following dua, and Bismillahi wa ala millati Rasulillah. Okay, so those who are lowering the deceased or the mayyit into the grave, they should recite this particular dua. Obviously nowadays, because you don't actually physically lower the deceased, because they do it with the machine or with the tractor, then people around, they should then just recite this dua. Okay. Normally this dua is for those who are actually physically lowering it, but because obviously, especially when you are burying the deceased in the UK or in Handsworth, say for example, you don't actually, because you're not actually physically doing it. So what you can do is when the body is being lowered to the grave, you can actually read this dua a bit loudly, okay? Or you could read the following dua, Bismillahi wa ala sunnati Rasulillah. Any question before we look at the next batch of rulings?
Can you just talk with me? Can you just
Oh, sorry.
the text?
Yeah. Many of these duas are in actually Talimul Haq. So you'll find Talimul Haq. But yes, Bismillahi wa ala millati Rasulillah. And number 2, Bismillahi wa ala sunnati Rasulillah. Is it okay? It's a bit too fuzzy. It's a bit fuzzy, isn't it? With headaches looking at it.
It's alright.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. The next batch of rulings. Okay. Now the whole body of the deceased and not just the face should be turned on its right side to face the Qibla. Okay. So it should be on its. The main thing is the right side. Okay. Facing towards the Qibla. Okay. So it's not like just the face, but actually the whole body of the deceased should be facing towards the Qibla. So what I'm trying to say is that you should do it in such a way, or you should like lower the body in such a way that it's facing the Qibla. So going back to what the brother mentioned here, just imagine Qibla is this side, and just say the grave is in, just say for example, this direction. So now, two things you need to abide by. One is the deceased right hand side, and also the Qibla as well. Now if it's been dug this direction, then obviously the mayyit will be buried this way, innit? Yeah, with the Qibla and also the right hand side as well. If Qibla is, say for example, this side and that side, so obviously the mayyit will have to be buried this way with the right hand side. So you should do it in such a way where obviously the right hand side is being maintained, that he's actually tilted to his right hand side and also facing the Qibla as well. Okay. If for some reason you can't manage or you can't do it, then the main thing, as mentioned in the hadith here, is that it should be facing towards the Qibla. So if you can't, just say for example, turn him to the right hand side for some reason, then the main thing is that you should face him towards the Qibla. So if that means that his left side is towards the Qibla, okay, then so be it. But the main thing is the Qibla. But what you should do is that when you lowering him to the grave, two things you should maintain. That is that he on his right hand side, and also him facing towards the Qibla. Okay. Does that make sense? Obviously, you don't have to be proper bang on towards the Qibla, just to that particular direction. So even if you can't get pinpoint, but as long as he's facing that particular direction, then that would be sufficient. Yeah. Okay. The next ruling is the strips of cloth used to fasten the shroud should also be opened. Okay, so if you remember a couple of weeks ago or 2-3 weeks ago when we were looking at the shrouding of the deceased, so I mentioned that where there's a danger that the coffin or the shroud may open, then what you should do on the leg side, in the middle, and also on the head side, you should tie the coffin so that the coffin doesn't open. So now remember, we're talking about when there's no coffin there. So you lower the mayyit, the deceased, in the grave. So now what you should do is remove the so you should remove the cloths, the strips of cloth which you use to fasten the mayyit. You should just remove that, okay? Because obviously, as I mentioned before, that we tie the cloth so that the shroud doesn't open. But obviously when you now placed it in its final resting place, obviously there's no danger of it open, or even if it does open, there's no problem, because obviously you're going to cover the deceased now. So therefore you just remove the strips of cloth. Okay. The next ruling goes on to say regarding while lowering the body of a woman. Now there's two scenarios here. If she's in a coffin, okay, so the parda has already been done because she's in a coffin, then it is mustahab and desirable to actually have a cloth shielding the grave. Okay, so just an example, like you've dug a hole here and you're going to bury a woman or a sister. So in that situation, what you should do is that there's nothing wrong. Men could obviously attend her janazah. There's nothing wrong with that. Men can actually be there burying, even strange men. But what you should do is that it's mustahab in that situation when there's a coffin involved. You should just get like a piece of cloth and just use that as like a screen or a parda. And then the coffin should then be lowered to the grave. Okay, now remember that is only when it's mustahab. Again, you don't have to do it. Even if somebody didn't do it, then there's no problem in that. Why? Because the woman is already in the coffin and there's no danger of her body being exposed. But obviously if a woman or a sister is being buried without a coffin, now in that situation it becomes wajib to cover that, to do parda when you are lowering her to the grave. Because as I mentioned before, that because she's not in the coffin, there's a danger that what could happen is that, her coffin, it may open. Because remember the coffin, it's not like, say, button, like nicely sewn and stuck. It just basically wrapped. So there's a danger that what could happen is that, some parts of the coffin may open. So obviously you don't want to see, like, especially a woman, a dead woman's satar and aura when you are burying her. So in that situation, what you should do is that obviously the mahram men, they should like put like a either side, just hold a sheet, like you do like parda and stuff, like a curtain in front. So the other get mahram men who are there attending the janazah, the burial, they just obviously won't see anything. And those who are the mahram of that woman would then lower her to the grave. And as soon as she's lowered, then obviously they'll remove the parda and the hijab. Okay. So that's like what you do when you bury a woman. Okay. It then goes on to say that the cavity in a lahad grave, so cavity here means like, that compartment we were talking about, so that should now be sealed with unbaked mud bricks and reeds, and a shirk grave should be covered with wooden planks. Okay, so at the bottom or near the bottom, as I was explaining, there would be wooden planks or bamboos, yeah, and then you place the deceased on the wooden planks or the bamboos, and then the mud and soil on top. If you've done a lahad grave, remember lahad is that compartment here. So after you've opened or after you've dug the compartment and you put the deceased inside, then do you know that compartment, it should now be sealed with unbaked bricks. Okay, not the nice fancy orangish color bricks, but it should be with unbaked bricks, and then on top of that there would be the mud and the soil. So that, so basically the lahad compartment, that will be covered with unbaked bricks, and if you just dug a regular grave, a normal trench, then at the bottom there will be wooden planks or bamboos, and the mayyit and the deceased will be on top of that. Okay, any questions regarding what I just mentioned there? No? Okay, good. Okay, the next point is regarding okay, now those of the brothers, or obviously going to be brothers who have attended the janazah, after the mayyit and the deceased has been lowered to the grave, then it is mustahab and desirable that each person, okay, what you should do, each person, they get 3 handfuls of soil and they put it inside the grave. Okay, and it's mentioned that, and again I'm sure you've read this before, that the first handful of earth one should read minha khalaqnakum. Okay, so you get 1 handful of mud and soil, minha khalaqnakum. Okay, you read that. Then the second handful you read wa fiha nu'idukum, and on the third handful you will read wa minha nukhrijukum taratan ukhra. And this happens to be verse 55 of Surah Taha as well, so you could always check it there in the Quran afterwards. So verse 55 of Surah Taha. Okay, so what will happen is that, and this is very rarely does take place, but obviously this is mustahab, that everyone who's attended, okay, so just say if 100 people are there, so everyone should actually take turns and actually put 3 handfuls of soil inside the grave. And after they've done that, then you should let the tractors or the workers who are there then put the rest of the soil and the mud inside the grave. So firstly, what you should do, you should actually participate in actually putting the soil and the mud inside the grave. And after everybody's done that, then everybody should then put the mud and the soil inside the grave. Okay. Any questions or?
It's one that I attend. You say there's 3 handfuls, but for some reason this one, this says everyone just put 1 handful. What happens?
Yeah, first of all, it's mustahab, and like sometimes what they do is that, because I don't know this, they want to quickly just like get the done, the burial done. That's why I just say, or just do 1 handful and so on. But it's mustahab that it's 3 handful, and it's mustahab that you actually use your own your hands as well. Because I've been to some other janazahs where they don't actually do it. They actually use a spade. And they just like put the 3 spades of thingy. It's mustahab that you actually use your own hand and then you read that dua minha khalaqnakum. Ji. Oh, sure. Wa minha nukhrijukum. Wa minha nukhrijukum taratan ukhra. Yeah. Okay, now it's mentioned that both hands should be used for throwing the mud and the soil. Okay, so not just one hand. You actually try to use both hands when throwing the mud and the soil. And the next ruling thereafter says that only that amount of earth will be returned to the grave. Okay, so as was taken out, basically that you don't get any extra mud or soil from anywhere. You know, you don't go to Asda and get some more soil or something like that. So what you do is that however much which was taken out, then you will only put that back into the grave. And it's mentioned that it's makruh to add more soil than the actual and the original amount. Okay, now the next ruling then goes on to say that it is mustahab to raise the grave slightly in the form of a camel's hump to the extent of one handspan. Okay, so what is that? So just for example, one handspan. So just say this is the grave. So up to one handspan. Okay, so not too big here, but up to the extent of one handspan, you should actually in the middle have a humpish. Yeah, so like have a hump in the middle of the grave. Okay, so that's like the sunnah. So you should do it like when you are placing the soil or the mud back into the grave. You should do it in such a way that you mold it like it's like a nice humpy shape at the end. Yeah.
Is that the maximum?
Yeah, one handspan. Yeah. He says here that he then goes on to say that it is makruh to make the grave square shaped or to raise it much more in height. So to have it more than a handspan, then that is makruh and disliked. And also to have it in a kind of square shape. Again, you see sometimes when you go to Handsworth, Muslim graves, you're talking about not non-Muslim graves, talking about Muslim graves, that they've got it in a kind of like a square shape, you know, like a rectangle, and it's got like buildings and stuff. So that's wrong. Okay, remember we'll look at it later, inshallah. Like obviously the whole idea of a grave is to have it simple as possible, and so that when you go to visit the grave, you remember about the hereafter. So if you're going to go there and have, you know, nice beautiful tombs and everything, people are going to be marveling at the tomb or the grave rather than, you know, thinking about the hereafter. So obviously you're not supposed to have the grave in a square shape, and it shouldn't be like too big, because then it becomes like a structure, and the whole purpose of a burial or a grave, people will forget about it. And the last thing, which unfortunately very few people do, is that it's considered to be desirable that you should sprinkle water onto the grave, okay, to keep the soil together. So after you bury the deceased, and after you've done that, then just carry a bottle of water around. Obviously there may not be water around there, but just carry a bottle of water around. What you do, just get some water in your hand and just like sprinkle it over the grave. And this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did with the grave of Hazrat Sa'd bin Mu'az radhiyallahu anhu, and this hadith can be found in Sunan ibn Majah. Okay, any question regarding all of this? Yeah.
Rose water is welcome for sprinkle.
Rose water is okay as well. Yeah, rose water is okay. That's fine. Any water, yeah, water, rose water, that's okay. Okay, let's have a look at give me some time for the next topic. Gigi, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's coming up later. Branches, flowers, everything's coming up later. Okay, the next section is what to do after burial. Okay, so after you bury the deceased, then what should you do? Now, this is mustahab, yeah? So what I'm going to mention, this is all established from hadith. You get some people, I've been to a janazah where after the burial, this person was saying, no one should stay. No, everybody should go home now. Okay, you know, this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, that after you bury the deceased, you should actually stay there. Like, you know, it doesn't mean that you then quickly go away. No, you should actually stay there. And it's mentioned that you should recite Surah Fatiha and the beginning verses of Surah Baqarah all the way until Ulaika ala hudan min rabbihim wa ulaika humul muflihun at the head side of the grave. So if the mayyit's buried here, so near its head side, should go there and then read Surah Fatiha and also the beginning verses of Surah Baqarah until the end. And then he goes on to say, then on the leg side, you should then read the last verses of Surah Baqarah. And the last verses here means Aman Rasul bima unzila ilayhi min rabbihi wal mu'minun. So lillahi ma fis samawati wa ma, the ayat, with the ayat afterwards, the last two verses, amana rasulu bima unzila ilayhi min rabbi wal mu'minun, from there all the way until the end of Surah Baqarah. Okay, so this is what should be recited on the head side of the grave, or the feet side of the grave, whereas on the head side of the grave, Surah Fatiha all the way until ulaika ala hudan min rabbihim wa ulaika humul muflihun. It then goes on to say that after you've done that, you should then supplicate whilst facing the Qibla. Yeah. Question arises that can you actually, a lot of people do this, they actually face the deceased. So just say the deceased there, so they actually face the deceased and then they do dua. Are you allowed to do that? Now, technically speaking, as long as your intention is I'm praying to Allah, then it's okay. Okay, so even though you're raising your hands in front of the deceased, but if your intention or niyat is that no, I'm praying to Allah, then you can actually face the deceased and make dua. The scholars have said that where there is a danger that people may think, oh, this person is asking the deceased, or he's praying, or he's making dua to the grave and so on, then it will be disliked and makruh and haram. But where that is not the case, then it will be permissible. Generally speaking, obviously when we go to visit the grave and so on, obviously our intention is obviously when we do pray to, even though we may be facing towards the deceased, but our intention is what faith, we're praying to Allah. So therefore, if you were to face the deceased and make dua, but your intention is that you're making dua to Allah, there's nothing wrong with that. But obviously it's best to save yourself from any doubt is that you face towards the Qibla. And he says there that you seek forgiveness for the deceased and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him or her steadfastness during the questioning in the grave. The Munkar and Nakir questions. Okay, everybody will get those questions. So during that time, it's going to be a very, very, difficult exam. So you should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that person, that may Allah grant him or her steadfastness when he or she is being questioned by Munkar and Nakir. Okay, and it then goes on to say that how long should you be there for when you are burying the deceased? Because as I said, some people say no, after you do this dua, then you should leave as soon as possible. We can see from the next hadith that Sayyiduna Amr bin As radhiyallahu anhu, he told his son that after his death, he should be there for the duration required to slaughter a camel and distribute its meat. Okay, so you should stay there. So however long it takes to slaughter a camel. Now, even anyone who's like expert, like the Arabs, for us it'll probably take like probably hours to slaughter a camel. But Arabs and even those in Bangladesh, they're good at very quick at slaughtering. But even slaughtering the camel and still distributing the meat, it still takes a while. So what Sayyidina Amr bin As who instructed his son is that, look, don't just leave straight away. Even after you read Surah Baqarah and the last few verses of Surah Baqarah and you do dua, don't leave straight away. Actually stay there for a while, something reasonable like 15 minutes, 20 minutes even, after you've buried the mayyit or the deceased, and thereafter you should leave. Okay, I'm mentioning this because obviously, unfortunately, you get people who are not obviously well versed in the Sharia, and they say no, after you bury, you should go straight away. You get some who say that, or don't even what do you call it? Yeah, don't even read any dua, don't even say Surah Baqarah and so on. So I said this is all like those people, unfortunately, who are not well versed in the Sharia, should actually be there for a while, and obviously as a source of comfort, as a source of support when Munkar and Nakir are questioning him. And the next point, he goes on to say that it is innovation, a bid'ah, to perform adhan at the grave. Okay, obviously the Brailwis, as you know, they do this quite a lot. That when they bury the deceased, so what happens is that they give adhan and so on. Okay, so they probably get the mosque muaddin or someone to come and give adhan. So there's no basis of that in the Sharia, no kind of like hadith or anything. So there's it's an innovation to perform azan at the grave. Shall we stop there? Or?
Yeah, I think we understand.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nasalli ala rasulil kareem amma ba'd. Okay, now the next section which we are going to look at is regarding where should the deceased be buried. So where should the mayyit and the deceased be buried? And obviously this leads to the question whether it is permissible to take the body back to Bangladesh or Pakistan and so on and so forth. Now, as you can see from the first paragraph, that some scholars have said that you're only allowed to transport the body 1 or 2 miles, within 1 or 2 miles from where the deceased passed away. So if he say, for example, passed away in Birmingham, or just say, for example, in Smallheath, then within like a 2-mile radius, you can take the body. The second opinion, which is like considered to be more preferred in the Hanafi fiqh, is that it would be permissible within the distance of a Shari'i journey, which, if you remember when we were looking at the Musafir section, 48 miles or 54 English miles. But anyway, 48 miles. So basically, up to 48 miles, you can take the deceased and bury him there. So just say, for argument's sake, if the deceased, I don't know, he passed away, say, I don't know, Walsall or Coventry, whatever. He's from Birmingham, but he passed away, say, in Walsall or Coventry. So where he passed away, say, in Coventry, you could now take the deceased back to Birmingham, and you could bury him there. Why? Because it's within the 48-mile radius. But obviously, anything beyond this, i.e., somebody passed away in Birmingham, and then taking the body back to Bangladesh, taking the body back to Pakistan, taking the body here and there, then that would be considered impermissible and unlawful. Okay, you're not allowed to do that. And the main reason for its detestability or impermissibility is because, remember, when they take the body back to foreign countries, to drain the body, they actually put like alcohol inside to keep the body fresh. So that's one. And also, you're going against the hadith, because the hadith quite clearly says that when somebody passes away, then asri'u bil janazah, which means that do the janazah ASAP, as soon as possible. So and obviously those who do take the body back to Bangladesh, you'll see that there's at least a good 7 days, 7-8 days before they are buried. Because what happened, they pass away here, then it takes 1 or 2 days, to get all the coroner's report, the death certificate. They do the bathing, then they do the janazah here. Then afterwards, another 1 or 2 days before he goes to Bangladesh. And then sometimes it's the day after when they reach Bangladesh, then it's buried. So when you look at it, many people or many bodies which are sent to foreign countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, there's at least a good 7-8 days, some cases even like 10 days from the moment he passed away until, so you're just giving more taklif and more pain to the deceased. So therefore, that's why the scholars have said that it's makruh tahrimi and highly reprehensible to take the body or the deceased beyond a Shari'i journey, 48 miles, and bury him there. The next paragraph thereafter just says that to bury a person in their home, then that is also makruh tahrimi and haram. Okay, so somebody passed away, just say he passed away at home, then you can't just say he passed away in his living room, so you can't dig his living room and just bury him there. That is only specific for the prophets and the messengers, yeah. So those who are prophets and Nabi, you probably heard the hadith when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, then the Sahabas, they were saying, where shall we bury Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Then Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu then narrated a hadith that he heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that whatever prophet passes away, he is buried in that place. So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he passed away in Hazrat Aisha anha's hujra and in Hazrat Aisha anha's room. So they dug that area and they buried Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam there. So it's only prophets and messengers, they are buried in their homes or where they passed away. But for any other person besides prophets and messengers, they have to be buried in the graveyard or cemetery or somewhere outside their house. They can't be buried inside their own homes. Any questions or?
Someone, while they're alive, explicitly says, no, I want to be buried back home.
No.
You should just go against the...
Yeah, you should. Yes.
So, also, Sheikh, when they send bodies abroad, they cut the body and take all the organs out. This is very bad. They're giving pain to the body. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's quite a few reasons, quite a few factors why it shouldn't be taken back to other countries. Okay, some miscellaneous rulings regarding graveyards and qabristan and burial and so on. The first ruling is, can we have a gravestone for the deceased or for the mayyit? So it's mentioned that if it's for identification purposes, then it is permissible. Okay, meaning that because sometimes what could happen over years, you probably sometimes forget where the mayyit is buried. So for identification purposes, to have a kind of like a gravestone there, and you just like mention, say his name, and probably like where he passed away, what date he passed away, that's okay. We're going to look at it later to like, to write Quranic verses and so on. That's impermissible. So what you can have on the gravestone is basically his name and basically his date of death. Okay, something like that. To write Quranic verses and these kind of things, or to write any kind of poetry, or his village in Bangladesh, whatever, then there's no need for that. Okay, what's the point of writing where he was born in Bangladesh, where he's dead. What I'm trying to say. So what I'm trying to say, just his name, and that would be sufficient. He says there that, however, it is not permissible to lavishly adorn the gravestone with Quranic verses, poetry, and so on. Okay, so no need to like make it lavish, the actual gravestone, make it out of gold or silver or nice fancy colors, and also to adorn it with Quranic verses or any other things which are not relevant to its true purpose, then that is not allowed. Number 2, it is impermissible to build domes or make solid graves, as it has been forbidden by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so to make like a dome on the grave, where you buried him, so to have a dome or a tomb or any kind of like a building around it, like a grave, or what we call like a manar or something like that, like they do with some Shah Jalal, Shah Furan in Bangladesh and so on. So something like that, which have like a big massive tomb and so on, then that is something which is disliked. Okay, you're not allowed to have that. Okay, so that is something which is impermissible. The next point afterwards is that there is no basis walking 40 steps from the grave and then supplicating. Okay, it's like one of those Bengali traditions that what happens is that, just say you buried him there, so they'll walk 40 steps back. Again, they walk like, they won't actually walk that way, they'll actually walk this way, like facing the grave. So they'll walk 40 steps back and then they'll pray for the deceased. So again, there's no basis in that. Okay, obviously you've realized when you've been, I'm sure all of us, most of us have, attended janazah, you see some, really funky things there. So many of them are not actually established from anything. Yeah.
Regarding your previous point about the building, now some families have their own graveyard, and it's a raised ground because of water around it. This is mainly in Bangladesh. Because of water and
okay.
Building around it, so like 4 walls.
That's okay. If that's the 4 walls they have is more like to show that this is their land, and it's more, that's okay. But what we're talking about on the actual grave, to have a kind of like a tomb or a building, then that's wrong. Okay, the next ruling goes on to say that it is not permissible to bury a Quran with the deceased. Okay, so you could read Quran or any books or anything like that. So or his television or his iPhone or something. So no faida, no benefit in that. It is permissible to bury the deceased at any time of the day. Okay, I think I mentioned in the janazah section that you can't pray janazah during those 3 times, which is sunrise, sunset and midday. But when it comes to actually burying the deceased, then there's no restriction, there's no prohibition. So if you want to bury the deceased at sunrise time, that's okay. If you want to bury the deceased at sunset time, or even at night time, 12 o'clock, whatever, then everything's allowed. So burying the deceased in the night or in the day, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's no kind of haram times of burying the deceased. The only ruling, as I mentioned in last week's lesson, is regarding the janazah, which obviously you can't do during the haram times. It is permissible to reserve one's grave. Okay, so you can actually reserve your grave. Like just for example, if you were to buy the land from someone and say that, okay, I reserve, say, 10 graves for my family. So to reserve one's grave during your lifetime, then that is allowed. It is not correct to place a sheet beneath the deceased at the bottom of the grave. So again, another kind of innovation. As I mentioned before, they should place wooden planks. But what people do is they say, oh well, wooden plank's going to hurt the deceased, so we just place like a nice bed there or something. So to have a bed there, or a cushion or something like that, or a sheet, then again, there's no basis of that. And this then takes me on to a question which one of the brothers asked, placing a fresh branch on the grave or a twig on the grave. Now there's 2 things here. which I'm going to mention. Firstly, there is a hadith, you probably heard this hadith, it's of Sahih al-Bukhari, that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was passing by two graves, and he said that these two dwellers of the graves, they are being tortured, but they are being tortured for something which is minor. Okay, something which is small, but they are being punished in the grave. And the two things which the two dwellers of the graves did was, one of them, he didn't take care when he urinated, so he just like let the urine come on his clothes and his body and so on. And the second person was that he would tell tales, nammam. So because of that reason, they were being tortured, they were being punished in the grave. So what did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? It's mentioned in the hadith, he got a twig, he broke into two pieces, and then he put it on the graves. And he said that as long as the twigs remain fresh, then the azab on the dwellers would be easy and lightened. Because as you know, as mentioned in the Quran, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ, which means that every single creation of Allah, it praises Allah. Okay, so even these twigs and branches, they also praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as long as the twig is inside the grave, then what would happen, because it's doing tasbih, saying subhanallah, subhanallah and so on, then that will then transcend into the grave, and the adhab which that person is facing will be lightened. Okay, obviously you won't probably totally eradicate it, but what you will do is that you will actually make it easier, and it will lighten the adhab and the punishment. So basically what we can derive is that, and this is something which is permissible to do, is somebody's passed away, you could actually, when you go and visit the grave, when you go and visit the person, you could actually stick twigs or branches inside the grave. But this doesn't mean, and this is where a lot of people take the wrong meaning, they use this hadith and they say, okay, that means we can now put like flowers and bouquets of flowers and so on. That's not allowed. Okay, what the hadith is telling us is just the actual twigs itself, you can place that, but it doesn't mean that it's permissible now to start placing flowers and so on.
How about a small apple tree, Sheikh?
Apple tree?
Oh, yeah. Or, yeah.
Apple? Any reason apple?
Or some kind of tree,
If you're hungry.
small tree.
If it grows by itself or something, then that's different. But
Otherwise not.
I mean, you should actually intentionally dig anything there, or place any seeds or anything like that.
Black apples.
Okay. What we'll do, we'll just make a start in the graveyard section, and then we'll probably finish it next week because it's quite a lot. So we'll just make a start on this one, inshallah. Okay. The next section is regarding visiting the graveyard. Okay. Now, there's two things here we mentioned. Firstly is regarding men, and then at the bottom regarding women. Now, obviously, regarding men, it's something which is very, very recommended. Yeah, visiting graveyards, even though there's no one in that particular cemetery in terms of your relatives or loved ones or siblings, but even then, just to go and visit the graveyard is the best, the best nuskha, the best kind of cure to take out love for this world. Okay, because obviously sometimes what happens is that we sometimes get too engrossed in the dunya and we forget about, the akhirah and the hereafter. We think too much about work, about jobs, about our career, and we just think that, we're just going to be here for 60 years, and we don't think about the hereafter. Visiting the graveyards or the cemetery, now and then, and when you look at it, actually the people of Smith, should be quite grateful because the graveyard just around the corner. Sometimes for people living quite far, it's a bit difficult for them, but I think for us it's very, very easy, that just on the way, or it's very near to Smethwick. So it's something which we should do, getting the habit of at least like once a month or something like that, getting the practice of visiting graveyard. Just go there just for 5-10 minutes, half an hour, and just do some du'as and remember anyone. I say it doesn't have to be any of your loved ones, any Muslim who's there, just going and visiting the grave. It's benefit for them in terms of when you recite something, Isal Thawab, they get benefit, and also it's a good kind of reminder for yourself that one day you will be in that particular place as well. So this is something which is recommended. It's mentioned that initially Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prohibited both men and women from visiting the graveyards initially, and the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu initially did that was because it was just very soon after Zaman Jahiliyyah, the days of ignorance, and what they would do there is they would do all various types of innovations and shirk. So what they would do, they would go there and they would slaughter animals in the name of their gods and so on. They would wail and mourn. So therefore, initially Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited everyone, men, women, from visiting the graveyard. But later on, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed the permission for men, and regarding women, well, this question, but definitely for men, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed that. This then takes us on, obviously there's a hadith here, then this takes us on to the next masla, with regards to women. Is it permissible for women to visit the graveyards? Now there's a hadith there which can be found in Musnad Ahmad, Ibn Majah, Tirmizi, where it says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam cursed women who visit the graveyard. Okay, those women who visit the graveyards frequently, that's like the key word here as well. Those who like always there visiting the graveyard, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has cursed them. Then he goes on to say, some people of knowledge say that this was before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed visiting the grave. Thus, when he gave permission, both men and women were including in his permitting it. Like both men and women were allowed or permitted in visiting it. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say is that, this hadith here, what it says, but visit them now, fazuruha. That's the Arabic word. So some scholars have said that initially it was prohibited for women to visit graveyards, but then when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this hadith and he said, okay, now you can visit it, some scholars have said that, okay, the permission also applies for both men and women. The same way men are allowed to visit the graveyards, similarly women are also allowed to visit the graveyards as well. Okay. Others say that he disliked for women to visit graves due to their lack of patience and their excessive wailing. Okay, so other scholars said no, it's still makruh tahrimi for women to visit graveyards. Why? Because when they go there, they start crying, mourning, wailing and so on, then it becomes makruh and disliked. Now at the bottom here, conclusion. What's the conclusion of this ruling? Basically, what we can gather is that there's difference of opinion. Some scholars have said, no, it's okay for women to visit graveyards, whereas others say that no, it's impermissible and disliked. Now, what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that if a woman is visiting graveyards and it's infrequent, not frequently as was prohibited, infrequently, meaning like once, say once in a blue moon, once a year. Yeah. Obviously for men, they should try to visit as often as possible. But just say, for example, a woman, just say once every 6 months, twice a year, 3 times a year, very like infrequently she's visiting it. That's one. And also when she goes there, she doesn't do any kind of wailing, because women, the emotion, they could get emotional. Particularly, just say if a woman goes there, husband's passed away or son has passed away at a young age, so they go there and they start becoming emotional, start crying and making a scene and so on. So as long as they don't do that, and also number 3, as I mentioned before, they maintain the rules and the regulations regarding parda, hijab, in terms of covering and so on and so forth. So as long as these 3 conditions are found, then it is okay and permissible. So we'll use the word mubah. We won't say that, oh, it's recommended and rewardable, but we'll say it's mubah. Mubah meaning permissible for women to visit graveyards. Okay? Because when you look at the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that we should visit graveyard, is this one here. This is the reason. For the lesson desire for this world and remind one of the hereafter. And when you look at it, the same way we are going to pass away, women, our wives, our daughters, our sisters, they're also going to pass away as well. Now the same way we are in need of, remembrance and tazkirah of the hereafter, women are also in need of what? Reminders of the hereafter, aren't they? It's not like women are going to be immortal in this world, they're not going to die, and only men are going to die. No, men are going to die, and also women are going to die as well. So the same way men need remembrance and reminders of the hereafter, similarly women also need reminders of the hereafter. And when you look at it, sometimes women need more reminders of the hereafter, because especially in our culture, in our community, obviously men, they're always coming to the masjid, they listen to sermons, they listen to talks. The speaker will always remind them of, maut and death and the hereafter. Whereas women, our daughters, our wives, most of the time they are home, they probably don't get that picture of the hereafter. When we look at, they tend to be a bit more engrossed in the dunya than say men. So when you look at it, women are actually more in need of reminders of the hereafter. Does that make sense? So as I was saying, that it's not that strict, this particular ruling, as long as the 3 conditions are mentioned. Number 1, it's infrequent. Number 2, they don't go there and start wailing and mourning. And number 3, they do the rules of hijab and parda, then it will be permissible for them to visit the graveyards. Okay, we'll leave it there, inshallah. Any questions or